Okay, here's a video in which I'm repeating what I've said before for emphasis, and I'm putting it all under the heading of a singular video, so it's all here for you to see. And it's basically my sharing with you my success over creating a 4-ingredient blend that is so significant it stands worth repeating. And it's made of just 4 ingredients. And the primary ingredient, the active ingredient, is silver, extracted from the silver plates acting as electrodes in a colloidal silver setup. That's distilled water in silver electrodes, pure 4/9 fine. And if I can center it again, and a magnetic stir bar at the center of the beaker there, spinning around, and you can see some debris already starting to accumulate. It's been running for several hours now. So that's the magnetic stir device that keeps things stirred up, and that's the generator that I'm using, the Pro 7 from silvergen.com. Yeah, I gotta center it. Whoopsie. I gotta center it. There we go. So that's equally resistant, conductive, or resistant all the way around. So that produces an excess. Maybe why don't I get down here? That produces an excess of silver in a water solution, an excess beyond the 15 parts per million. I take it to the point of cloudiness. Now, when it gets done after several hours, I don't know how long, I have an appliance timer on it, but things are never consistent from one day to the next as it is. I take out the electrodes, and I take out the water, allow the container to dry so I can reuse the same container, and then shove down in the bottom of the container these sticks. Now I gotta back up. These sticks of edible or beeswax. I call them edible because it's nice. The seller calls it organic. These are 1-ounce bars that I got on Amazon. They come 5 ounces at a time, a 5-bar, 5-ounce package for around $6, slightly over $6. To me, it's not significant that they're organic so much as that they are edible, because this is the only brand that's edible. They're soft. You can break off a corner with your bare hands. With the pound organic bars you get from other suppliers on Amazon or elsewhere, the beeswax is so hard you can't even break off a corner. You know, it takes a knife, a sharp knife or something. And those are not edible, it turns out. They have something in them, maybe paraffin wax, a small amount, I don't know, but something in them that clogs the capillaries, clogs the veins and arteries, and could give you a stroke if you're prone to that sort of thing in your family lineage at all. So I don't go near them. I use this exclusively, and I save the other for making candles, which I haven't made yet from those others. If I ever feel like it, I'll make candles out of them. But at the moment, but for edible purposes, this is the only one. Just one brand online that I know of, at least on Amazon at any rate, that's edible. So I stick these in standing up into a dry beaker, and I shove it down and I rotate it back and forth as I apply pressure with my other thumb, holding it with one hand and shoving it down with one thumb and rotating it with my other hand until it melts or softens sufficiently to adhere to the dry base. So it's got to be dry sticks of beeswax against a dry glass surface, and you can get it to stick. And so I put 4 because I need an adequate space for the water to circulate, because these magnetic stir mechanisms are not, you know, like a whirlwind. They're not like a tornado, you know. They're not that strong, at least not this one. So I only put in 4 sticks and maybe half a stick to float on top. And I let that stir for several hours, many hours. And whatever pieces of colloidal silver get broken down into smaller, finer particles and get stuck to the wax. And the water that was cloudy becomes clear. And once it's clear, it may be tainted with a color, but once it's clear, then I know it's done. It's taken away all the excess silver out of solution and brought the parts per million down to somewhere around, 20 parts per million, let's say. And then I take it out, put it on a cutting board, and with the help of a potato peeler, I wear a leather glove. I'm right-handed, so I put the right-hand glove over my right hand as I hold the potato peeler, because I'm going to be bumping my knuckles up against the tabletop, and I don't want to scrape off my skin just because I'm shaving off layers of beeswax. And so I shave off the top layer of all 5 sides that have the silver on them, and a little bit of the 6th. It gets underneath when it sticks to the glass. It's not perfect. So I shave off, and I create shavings that have silver on one side of the shaving and bare on the other. So here's the bare side that was cut off of the block, and here's the silver side. And I collect my shavings, and then when I'm ready, what I do is I combine the shavings into a ceramic bowl, or I could have used a mug, and I add some salt. This happens to be sea salt. So I add some salt. I add oil of your choice. Could be butter if you prefer. Something edible though, not mineral oil. Something, because I'm going to be using double duty. I'm going to be doing double duty on this finished product. I can eat it, but I can apply it to a wound as well. But I can eat it for internal healing, because it'll have an excess of silver, it'll have salt, it'll have oil, it'll have beeswax, and it'll have silver. The 4 necessary ingredients for making this a healing salve. And I can rub this on my skin, on a wound, and I'll have silver, I'll have beeswax to seal the wound, I'll have oil to, and I'll have salt. I don't know how the oil helps things, quite frankly. I just know it does. And the salt helps because it's a natural debridement, as Becker has indicated in his book, The Body Electric, and we need debridement in order to stimulate wound care, to get the body motivated to perform its healing and regeneration and rejuvenation. And salt, of course, is the basic mineral composition of the body fluids, so it's kind of natural to use salt in the first place. This just happens to be sea salt that I'm using. I could have used some other salt variety. I'm not sure I would want to use salt that contains solid matter. For instance, Himalayan rock salt literally has sand in it to a certain amount of grit. And I'm not sure I'd want that in this lotion formulation. So I would want something relatively free of grit. If you dissolve this salt in water, would you get any grit at the bottom of the water container? Hopefully not, because I wouldn't want that in my lotion. Certainly not up against a wound. If the wound's going to seal around grit, yeah, right. I wouldn't want that. So, but those are the 4 ingredients, and I put them into a ceramic container, and then I put the ceramic container inside, at the bottom of my crock pot I got for $16, all of $16 on eBay. Great crock pot. It has a crack on the side. That's probably why they were selling it for $6. And I set the setting not for warm. I set it for low. I could do it on high, but I don't need to. I should not do it on warm, because although warm is enough to melt something like coconut oil that's solid at room temperature, it is not enough, or enough to melt butter. It's not enough to melt beeswax. So I put it on low, and that's able to melt the beeswax. And there's no water. This is not a double boiler situation. I simply put my ceramic bowl or mug at the bottom, put on the lid, so that warm air can build up, and it gets hot enough to melt the beeswax, including the oil if the oil needs to be melted. And when they're all 4 melted, you take it out, and I took it out, with middies and oven mitts. Both the crockery pot, along with the bowl inside, because this isn't a mug with a nice handle on the side, so I can't take it out of the crockery pot. So I take both out, put it on a nice midi base, and then I stir it with one knife. I don't know, I have 2 knives here. Because you need 2 knives later on. But you only need 1 knife in the beginning, and I keep stirring it as it cools. I take the lid off, and when it cools down sufficiently, then I can take hold with my bare hands the sides of this bowl and take it out, and to help it cool down more quickly. So I'm constantly stirring, because the silver particles, the colloidal silver soot, I like to call it, because it looks like soot, but it's not soot, it's not oxidized, it's just colloidal silver particles that are black. They will sink to the bottom of this liquid along with the salt, and by constant stirring, some of the salt, or much of it, is actually able to dissolve, provided you stir it, though, and keep stirring it. But there are some particles of salt left over. You don't put a lot in, you just put a little of salt. And so most of the salt dissolves, and as you stir, or constantly stirring as this is cooling, it starts to stiffen and harden. And for one thing, you're helping the colloidal silver particles to diffuse, which wouldn't diffuse otherwise. They just kind of just hang out, in their non-dispersed state. So you have to stir it to get them all evenly dispersed. Yeah, not diffusion, dispersion. So you're helping them. You're helping them disperse evenly by stirring, but you're also helping it to cool by stirring, and solidify and harden by stirring. And when it gets done, it gets to look like this. Now this should be dark, or not should. Originally it was dark, but because it's been diluted down by a certain quantity of oil, you'll have to determine how much oil you want in your mixture so that it's nice and soft and not hard, because you're going to be rubbing this against a wound, and you may want to eat this too for the health benefits. So you add enough oil so that it's a soft mixture. So I had to do it twice because I didn't add enough oil the first time. But I didn't want to add too much because I didn't want to dilute down the silver property too much. But I did have to do it twice, and so the second time I added more salt because I had a larger volume, because I added more oil. And so I'm stirring, and then it gets hard, and then you use 2 knives to take one out, and the second knife, of course, you use to scrape off the first knife into your little container. I got like 6 or 8 of these at the 99-cent store with lids. They're very nice. These are like 2-ounce containers, I think, size, 2-ounce size. I think that's what they are, 2-ounce size containers, which are very suitable for my purposes. And so I'm going to scrape out, next time I have a meal, with my finger, I'm going to scrape out the knives and wipe off the knives and scrape the bottom of this bowl and eat the remaining lotion or healing salve. Let's call it a healing salve, because it's no longer really a lotion, merely a lotion. This is like a healing salve, because it's got all that nice silver in there, which is really good for healing, but it's also good for, well, I had botulism, and I didn't, or food poisoning the other night, and I didn't have this mixture. What I had were little balls of wax from taking these shavings and rolling them into a ball, and I just ate the ball, and then I realized I can't eat enough to get complete satisfactory results to overcome the food poisoning I was going through. So I had some chips with it. And then afterwards I realized, oh, the chips contain oil. The significant ingredients of chips in this situation is that they contain oil and they contain salt. And then I realized oil and salt were missing. And it made sense because of what Becker had said about salt, that it's a natural debridement to help the healing process. An aggravator, to aggravate the body, to stimulate it, to motivate it, to get involved, to step up its involvement, accelerate and intensify its involvement in the healing process. And salt is purifying. The chloride ion purifies or purges the liver. In nutritional books, chloride, if you had a chloride salt of some kind, the chloride component of that salt purges the liver. Of course, we use chloride as hydrochloric acid secretion in the stomach, so it supplies a necessary nutrient that we need to help us digest our food. And sodium helps the kidneys function properly. They help the intestines function properly. So it's, salt is just the right thing. And then oil. What does the oil do? You know what the oil does? It gets the bile to flow. It gets the gallbladder to function properly. And there's something about the production of bile, I suppose, that helps us digest beeswax. Because without the bile, we wouldn't really handle beeswax. It would just kind of sit there. And I think that's it. I think because beeswax and oil blend so readily, probably because chemically they're so similar in their two natures, that's why they blend so readily when the two are heated and the wax is melted, such that when it cools, you don't even know the difference anymore between where does the beeswax and the oil begin, and vice versa. They've become so well blended, it's unbelievable. Nothing like oil and water separate. Oil and beeswax do the opposite. They really love to get into each other molecularly and really blend. So there must be something about beeswax that's chemically similar enough to oil, such that when we take beeswax mixed with oil, our body seems to have a better job of dealing with the beeswax, digesting it, handling it, responding to its presence in the digestive tract. I think that's what it is. I think oil helps our body process beeswax, basically, and recognize how to. And on a wound, I'm not sure what function the oil plays. I know that oil and salt both suppress yeast, candida, so that something like a junk food, like chips, is very good at suppressing yeast overgrowth in the gut. That's about as much as I can say from my conventional wisdom of oil and salt, that they're actually useful, besides being nutrients in their own right. But when it comes to beeswax, I think it has to do with recognition of how to respond to beeswax and how to deal with it. Now, on a wound, I'm not sure what role the oil plays. Well, it helps soften up the beeswax. How do you rub beeswax into a wound? You can't. You'd have to melt it and drip it in hot into a wound, and originally that's all I could think of. How do I deal with beeswax silver mixture if I want to apply it to a wound? Well, I could melt the stuff. I could melt these and pour them into an open wound. Ouch, Not quite something I'd want to do. But blended with oil, beeswax and silver, and salt to act as debridement, this would be perfect in a wound. And when you think about it, the aging of the digestive system is a constantly wounded situation. The pot bellies of old guys, distended bellies. There's something going on there that's not quite right. What happened to their flat belly of childhood? In their childhood, they didn't do ab exercises to strengthen their abdominal walls. Yeah, they ran around and played, but they didn't make a point of doing anything, and yet they had such flat tummies. Why? Because there was nothing going on inside their lower intestines to cause distension to occur due to whatever's going on in a distended belly. It doesn't look right, and we keep wondering, well, how are we supposed to deal with that? Or are we supposed to deal with that? And so what I'm conjecturing is something went wrong with digestion. And so in a sense, the digestive system has been wounded because it's no longer functioning optimally. It's functioning suboptimally, less than what it should be functioning as, to what degree. So I think that's why this lotion is good for exterior wound, but the interior for consumption as well, because of the assistance it gives to the healing process where we put it. That's usually what happens with colloidal silver. It's not like silver hydroperoxide, which I take in my bath with MSM and mineral salts, that literally suffuses my entire body, but in a dilute way. And I don't use salt in the bath because it's aggravating, too aggravating for me to put in the bath. It too much dominates my life, and I don't have something to counterbalance it with to ease that aggravation. Because salt is an aggravator. That's why Becker called it a debridement tool. It aggravates. So I don't put it in the bath because that would be too much aggravation. I just allow myself to use it in my meals, in food. That's why I don't mind salty chips. It's nice. I like that as a change from time to time, something salty. But in the lotion, it could certainly work because it's exactly, it functions the way Becker would describe. It functions as an aggravating tool to help a wound be debrided, aggravated, irritated, to help it to motivate to heal itself. And apparently the same thing is needed inside in our wounded digestive system due to old age, and then we get distended bellies, and then indicating that, age has occurred. We're no longer young again, and nor is our digestion. So that's what I wanted to state about this very interesting recipe, whose properties are very interesting as well. And it takes those 4 ingredients of salt, oil, edible beeswax, and colloidal silver particles of a very high concentration to create this beautiful lotion or healing salve, cream. And this could be put in a larger container, and it's spreadable. If you put enough oil in here, you could use a butter knife to spread it on toast. That's literally what you could do. Like spreadable margarine. It's, you get them in a tub at the market, or you get whipped butter, which is very spreadable, but they have whipped air bubbles into there, kind of like ice cream, so that you can spread hardened butter straight out of the fridge because it's got whipped air bubbles inside. Well, this is spreadable for a different reason, because you've got oil that's naturally liquid at even refrigerator temperature. So if you avoid coconut oil, for this reason, and use some other vegetable oil, and avoid butter, then you don't have to worry about trying to whip this to make it spreadable. Let's say you use grapeseed oil, for instance, or olive oil if you want a strong flavor, or safflower oil, canola oil, whatever oil you choose that's normally liquid even at refrigerator temperature. Now you've got something that'll soften down the beeswax adequately enough that you can spread this on toast without having to whip air bubbles into it to make it spreadable. And so as a product, I think that's how to market it. If anybody has the gumption to market something like this, that's the way it should go. Probably in a tub form as a spreadable kind of a margarine substitute or butter substitute that has healing properties. And it's not that difficult to make, although it took me over a year to figure out how to make it. But and not that I was trying to, but I knew. It's the byproduct of over a year of research, about a year and a half of research into Dr. Robert Otto Becker, M.D., protocol on the use of silver and electricity. And so we use electricity for making the colloidal silver water, but then we veer into beeswax to make this lotion, to separate the silver from the water so that we can make a non-watery, oily salve or lotion or margarine kind of thing, whatever you want to call it. Because it has double use. You can eat it. This is totally edible. And the high concentration of colloidal silver works wonders for killing off the yeast that might predominate inside the gut, but it does not affect the lactobacilli to the same degree. They don't seem to be so sensitive to the silver as much as yeast is sensitive to silver. So it corrects any kind of imbalance in which yeast might be predominating inside the gastric system by bringing down their population to a more reasonable level, because they're supposed to be there, just not to a great degree. Kefir is a blend of lactobacillus and yeast organisms, but the yeast does not predominate, or else kefir would not be kefir. It would be something more like beer or sake, Japanese wine or whatever, or wine. But it's not. Kefir is not wine. It's not a fermented product entirely. It's more like yogurt, but it does have some of that yeast property to it, because it does have some yeast in it, but not a lot. And so that's what we want to opt for in our gastric system, is a balance. And I think yeast is hypersensitive to silver, the presence of silver, while lactobacillus is not to the same degree as yeast is.